Good afternoon, and welcome to the weekly dialogue with the national slate of LaRouche candidates. And today, for a change, we are all here together in the studio. I'm Diane Sayre from New Jersey. Here we have Lyndon LaRouche, Keisha Rogers from Texas, Bill Roberts from Michigan, Rachel Brown from Massachusetts, and Dave Christie from Washington. And Lynn, why don't you go ahead?
Well, this is a very special occasion and requires a dedication as opposed to simply an introduction. We have come into a period in which most of the members of Congress, some are qualified for what they do, but they don't do what they should do. and therefore, this group has a special qualification for candidacy to represent the nation through the representation of in the Congress. Now, it was said by Napoleon, at least attributed to him, he may not have actually said it, but it was attributed to him, that every officer in his command carried a field marshal's baton in his knapsack. I don't know if that was true of Napoleon, but I do know that Lazare Carnot, who is the man who saved France from destruction by creating the whole force which Napoleon later inherited, never got to be the president of France. But he was the most important figure in that part of the history of France and what came afterward, and played many roles and so forth. This crew, now seated with me here, has qualifications which virtually no incoming member of the Congress has, and very few of the senior. And on top of that, they have a qualification of knowledge and outlook, which is obviously lacking in the Congress in general at this point. Some of them have the potential, some of them have the qualifications, but the Congress is not exercising those qualifications wherever they exist. At this point, the nation requires that kind of leadership. Now, these candidates may or may not succeed in this election by formal standards, but they have a higher standard to meet than just being elected. The higher standard is to provide the sense of leadership which shames the other members of the Congress who don't come up to this standard. And that is no exaggeration. This is a set of candidates of which there is no likeness, to my knowledge, presently existing in the Congress. And I say that in all seriousness, not as some kind of acclamation. But what we've gone through in the recent days in this discussion has affirmed to me that these are exceptional candidates. They are capable of representing the people and the nation of the United States, which none of the others currently have been able to do. I don't want to run down anybody who I respect in the Congress, and some of them are doing great things and very important things right now. But what we need is a leadership, especially with this presidential candidacy set now. We need a leadership in the Congress which can actually lead the nation by virtue of the implications of their qualities as representatives of the nation. So this is a completely different kind of case. These people can stand up to things that most members of the Congress would never dream of standing up to. I know that myself personally. And so I'm honored to make these remarks at this occasion on my associates here.
Thanks. That's a tall order.
I give nothing but tall
yes.
orders.
We've noticed. And obviously, we are seated with Lyndon LaRouche, who is the actual functioning president of the United States, unlike that treasonous excuse for a president we have in the White House right now. I think we can start off with the fact that we just had elections in France where one of our collaborators, Jacques Cheminade, did an absolutely phenomenal job with his campaign. He put the mustache on Obama in full international view in all the European press. He raised the question of the breakdown of the financial system, which no one is willing to discuss. And he got an amazing response. I think he did something like 180 interviews in the last 2 weeks of his campaign. So his campaign has transformed permanently the discussion in Europe and has set a certain standard there, which will be very interesting to see how that unfolds in the coming weeks. Also, we know that apparently at the International Monetary Fund conference, an internal memo was circulated saying that the European banking system actually needs $8 or $9 trillion of bailouts. They didn't think it would sound good to say that publicly, so they admitted to $4 trillion, and then they're crowing about the fact that they've come up with $430 billion, which is 1/10 of what they're publicly saying they need, and it's only 1/20 of what they actually need. And of course, this wouldn't work anyway. So we are really on the brink of a major systemic blowout of everything.
Right, and as you have warned, Lynn, the system is disintegrating now, and the only chance of actually intervening to save that system is a threefold solution, which includes Glass-Steagall, first and foremost, the introduction, reenactment of a credit system, national banking, and the commitment to developments and improvement through NAWAPA. And many people will see this soon on our website if you have not already seen it. But our candidate slate and committee here, along with LaRouchePAC, has now initiated a call to action around the Glass-Steagall resolution for Glass-Steagall banking reorganization and the building of the NAWAPA 21 project that is now on the website, which we are going to call on everyone and ourselves organize all out throughout the entire nation as a national project to organize the country around a real economic recovery plan in the midst of this breakdown crisis.
Well, I think that's the only way things can go. We're at one of these moments in history where you don't have a range of options. Either we're going to do exactly what we've laid out, Glass-Steagall, credit system, and NAWAPA is really the only project with the scope and duration and range of activities that can be a foundation upon which to bring the real economy back. And that being the case, that this is the only way to go, and that means the death knell of the British Empire, which cannot exist any longer other than their desire and willingness to drag humanity down with them. And I think it's just more important to put the point on this that with the recent Obama saying that he's going to back up the Israelis, to come in with the Navy after an Israeli first strike on the Iranians, that this is an immediate trigger for a powder keg set to go, which has been the intention ever since Lynn had laid it out, that the death of Gaddafi, they were going to rush in to Iran, Syria, and that be really the beginning of a much larger threat to Russia and China, to get them to back down from this exact policy of economic development, of what they're committed to in the Arctic region, what they're committed to with the Strategic Defense Initiative, the Strategic Defense of the Earth policy, and to get them to back down and give up this commitment, because this is the direction that mankind is going to go. And so just to make it clear, Obama must go now more than ever. That's the only way to stop this insanity, and then it is on the table, like everything that we've fought for and Lynn for a much longer period of time. So it's
and it's very clear right now that with two non-presidential candidates that most people are looking at and saying, oh my God, now that we know it's these two, and that's horrible. And at the same time, we've got the breakdown of the Euro system going on, and at the same time, we've got the prospect that if we don't throw Obama out, we could be in thermonuclear war. The important thing, I think, this resolution and the mobilization to get the whole country behind Glass-Steagall and NAWAPA, this is the moment for it, because the most horrible thing is if you had this situation right now and there was no clear voice of leadership, that people didn't have something to turn to. And so we have this, we have the program, and we just have to be that clear voice that other people need to rally around.
Because what we're seeing right now, as you brought up with the other candidates, is that no one else is going to address the fundamental collapse of civilization itself. And obviously our platform of these 3 principles is the only clear solution. And I think the American population feels it in their bones that this is not just a normal crisis. They are very afraid of the candidates that they see because they know that both sides are going to result in probably thermonuclear war. People really sense that. So I think one issue at hand now is that it's not a matter of discussing the current events, but it's a matter of what are we going to intend to do, and to use human creativity as a vehicle to do that, to really go to the biggest questions right now, the questions of a threat to civilization. If we don't address the crisis for mankind due to changes in the universe that we economically have not decided to conform to, we have chosen not to make the breakthroughs in technologies that we need to support a growing population and to address the development of the universe, which mankind is a part of. So if we don't address these issues, as well as the fact that we have fascism in the United States through the Obama administration, there's no way out of this crisis. So we can say that to people. People can get it. And they have to realize that they have it in their power right now to throw this guy out and to take our country back.
The thing you have to look at in this case is right now we have gone through the preliminary phases of the selection of presidential candidates for both parties at present time. There could be an adjustment in that. This is not really the final answer, but it's very close to being a final answer. And that fact is rather terrifying. Because what the problem is that no one among all the prospective possible candidates for president that you could consider as serious types of candidates have stepped forward to replace this bunch of clowns. And when you condemn in the worst crisis which humanity has known so far, because mankind has never before faced the active threat of a thermonuclear crisis of this dimension. Nothing like it. And nobody who's qualified, mentally and otherwise, has stepped forward to place themselves as a prospective president in a serious manner. There are people in the Congress who I could pick out as, from the standpoint of qualified to be president. I can identify them, and I'm not going to do it here to get them into trouble. But they do exist. But no qualified candidate for president has come forth to seek the nomination as president. If they are, there's some obscure person who's not been mentioned heretofore. But qualified candidates, they don't exist. And this places the United States in great jeopardy as well as the world as a whole. We're looking at not only the immediate breakdown crisis of the world economy, especially the transatlantic region. Russia and China and India are in better condition than the nations of Europe or the nations of the Americas. I don't know about Argentina. They're probably the only one who, at least in temperament, would stand up as being qualified for that purpose. So there's nothing out there. And therefore, we have a very important role of leadership here because we are going to hound them in the right way. Now, to return to the question of the candidate, my view on the qualification of these candidates is that we have to launch the most important event possible from these candidacies. And your qualifications go largely that most candidates entering office, entering the campaign for office, have no conception of how to deal with these problems or even what these problems are. You do. And you are acting not as individual candidates, each seeking for office. You're each seeking office, the office you're designated for. But it's more than that. You're also a group of people who are acting as collectively as a leadership. You're acting as if you were a caucus of the entire Congress, a presidential caucus. You're acting also in the choosing of what a president must do and what a president must be at this time. And doing this is extremely important because since nobody else as nominal candidates is doing this of this way, you have a responsibility of putting yourself forward, both as individual candidates for office, but a team of candidates which is going to set the standard which we demand the other candidates meet up to.
I think going back to what with Jacques' campaign, what Jacques Cheminade did in France, towards the end, what he had said in talking to the voters, saying, "A vote for me, I will be," maybe I'm phrasing it wrong, the sword in the back of the incoming president, with the idea that the pressure of what he stood and fought for, not as in some sort of trying to appeal to the masses, but laying out very clearly what the issues were, fighting on the question of the fascism and austerity that we're seeing in Europe, referencing Obama with the Hitler mustache from that standpoint, what he did on this whole Eurex scandal, the short selling of the French bonds and whatnot, that he consistently just hammered at this, not from some vote for me standpoint, but by standing on principle and rallying a nation to that principle. And that's what we have to do. And what Lynn is emphasizing is to take a nation which has lost hope in the political process and rally them around these core constitutional principles.
Right.
One aspect, I think, which we really are unique is our presence in the streets of the United States. Because some of us were having a discussion last night about what the American people actually are suffering right now. And what families are going through is unbelievable. I mean, most people are finding themselves in a situation where they never thought they would be. Someone was talking about having met a woman who is now having to support 4 children. She lost a suit in court to her abusive ex-husband and, practically living out of her car. I mean, we're meeting people in these horrible circumstances. Or you take, Bill, the part of the country where you're from, we were there briefly out organizing in Detroit, and you see these highly skilled people in their 60s and 70s who are a gem, are the wealth of the nation, and they're just being treated like dirt. And I think that most of the so-called leadership in this country has decided that they just are not going to look at this. They don't want to consider it. That's not how you measure things. We're going to say we're in a recovery because we got the stock market to go up by, crushing the poorest, weakest members of the population. And therefore, when you speak the truth, it actually does resonate in a way that's very different in the past, so that what we saw with Jacques' campaign and the response that we're getting as we go out and organize is reflective of the fact that we really are in a revolutionary moment. We're at a breaking point where people know it's going to go one way or the other, and that they literally are not going to survive unless we change the policy.
Well, the question also is posed, how do you inspire someone like that? How do you give them a sense of empowerment? And their sense of empowerment is not just in, the fight over what issues are going to help me out or what issues are going to, give me more money or help me out of my immediate situation, but the empowering of the nation, of the population, lies in their understanding of their power to fight creatively, to say, what makes me human? Why, how did I get into this situation? Why am I being subject and why am I being a victim of the situation that I'm in? And how do I fight to get out of that situation? And, as the unique quality of what we represent, that's something that we're bringing to the American people, that most people don't go out into the field, don't go out and talk to people. I had one young lady call me and, she asked, well, what you're doing, what you're saying is pretty radical, calling for Obama's impeachment, the various other programs you're calling for, but aren't you afraid of what might happen to you? And if you have a sense of, no, you're not afraid of what's going to happen to you, you're afraid of what's going to happen to the nation if we don't survive, what's going to happen to civilization. And so therefore you fight and you give people the empowerment to fight because you have a sense of, what great things can come out in the future, what perspectives that we have to look forward to if we do fight. And so people get excited by that. People have a sense of empowerment that they can participate in something that is, even better waiting for them on the other side, something better in the future.
Doesn't that say something about the shortcomings of so-called religious people in the United States? That they are all concerned, immediately they profess to be concerned with immortality or something, but none of them are immortal. Now, there are many people who have died who are immortal because the outcome of their life changed the world for the better in what they were doing with their life. But when you think about the people, when the nation itself is in danger, and you're talking about the danger, the threat to all the younger people, to all the people who should be about to be born, and you're not thinking about the future, you're thinking that as if your day of your death is the end of everything, including the universe, as far as you're concerned. And people are acting like that. And when they call themselves religious and they don't in this way, and aren't willing to dedicate themselves, their lives, to the lives that come after them and out of them, then you've got a real kind of cowardice, a total lack of morality. And everybody who calls himself a churchgoer, who doesn't recognize this, ought to be kicked out of the church, or the church ought to be kicked out of them, or something like that. But that's the irony of this thing. The people in the United States no longer have a confident belief in the importance of their life. They don't think that giving birth to children has any significance. They don't give if they don't have children, or dedicating themselves to other people's children and the world they're creating for other people's children. And that lack of that devotion to the sense of the immortality of the human soul, that it's supposed to continue the course of life and leave weapons behind, in a sense, weapons of courage, weapons of insight, of discovery, and leave behind. And what they're doing is they're talking about their little petty lives, their petty number of people living on a planet of now 7 billion people who are going to be breeding in each generation about the same number. And they're wiping these people off the map before they're even born. And they call themselves Christians and things like that. What are they? Gutless wonders. And I don't think that any God would want to have these guys harbored in his premises if he could avoid it.
Well, they should try being human before trying to be Christian.
Work their way up to Christian.
Actually, just on that note, I mean, that's the issue of immortality is the credit system. The value of your currency is defined by what it's going to do in the future. It's not defined by what kind of usurious arrangements you can entrap people in and create slaves out of them. It's a commitment to say we're going to expand and create potential for the future of mankind, and that's what your banking system should be. And frankly, you just a lot of these Christians, you bring up Christ in the throwing the money changers out of the temple, and they don't even think of that as what it was actually about. It wasn't some he just didn't like this happening in the temple. It was a statement on what they were doing, usury. It was an evil policy of creating slaves out of people.
I take the case of Einstein, for example. And you have to realize that over 100 years ago, over a century ago, Einstein defined immortality in the terms of his discovery of matter-antimatter process. It reaches out to a practical grasp of the meaning of human life in the universe. And that was over a century ago when he was in the process of this matter-antimatter discovery. And when we even look at that from the standpoint of physical science, there's an affirmation. Now, he's dead sometimes. But he's still resonant and alive in the influence of what he's done right now today. What he did then was a gift which is expressed today in what matter, antimatter means in the solar system. We now have a solar system that's in trouble. As a solar system, we are in a situation where we have a vulnerability that one big rock of a certain size hitting Earth could wipe out the human species. And we have an obligation to mobilize science, as we now have some of the technologies to do that, to mobilize science, to assure the continuation of the human species. But we're not doing that. Obama just shut down God.
And Einstein played the violin, which is one of the other ways that our population has been completely robbed. We don't have a classical culture. And we've been discussing this a lot lately. You've been bringing it up on the weekly report, this whole question of time and the question of the way that the universe itself works is embodied in classical composition. And you think of the evil of denying this to our young people, and then you look at what people consider to be entertainment today, and everything is an assault on creativity. Everything is designed to lock you into just straight sense perception. And that's death. That is the end of immortality, because everything that's physical is not going to be in its same form in some future point. So as soon as you're locked into reliance strictly on senses, seeking out pleasure, avoiding pain, that's the end of civilization. And that's one of the key fights, that's one of the key contributions that we can bring to the populations of the United States and internationally, wherever we're organizing.
And it is joined, this question you're bringing up with classical culture is joined up with the question of the identity of our population in general, which I think we can affect with something like NAWAPA. I think there are a lot of people out there that don't have jobs or are young and they don't have a sense of identity of what they're going to do with their life, what it means. If we give them a mission through something like NAWAPA, that is the other side of the question of their identity, which is reflected in this cultural question of beauty as a principle in the universe.
Yes. Mm-hmm. It's the apperception of beauty, as opposed to the direct perception of it. The sense of a feeling of beauty, not necessarily the sensual experience of beauty, but the feeling of beauty. The feeling of certain kinds of thoughts and work is beautiful. People will say that's beautiful, and it's referring to an accomplishment, an idea, and saying that is beautiful. And that is, for ordinary people, is access to a sense of feeling good about themselves and good about their own lives. And I think that what we see out there is people do not feel good about themselves. They are ashamed of themselves because they know they're not fighting. And they give up, say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. It's like giving up on life. And one of our jobs essentially is to try to inspire in people a sense that under the darkest conditions, as people of the past have lived often, under the darkest conditions, the fight that you wage now, it may take 2 generations before that thing is justified, or 3 or 4 or more. We can think about whole parts of the world, whole sections of the population that had nothing and went through that again and again through successive generations. But by a devotion to the hope that they can achieve that and trying to do practical things to achieve that, they ultimately created an environment in which some of these things that should have happened would happen. And this kind of devotion to the meaning of our lives in terms of people to come, it is the thing that is lacking here. People say they're afraid about they're going to lose something, and they're going to throw away much more than they could possibly ever lose by what they don't do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that reconnection can be made with NAWAPA. But part of what's happened is that the population has lost the history of the nation. And by losing the history of what this nation was actually created to do, and in particular the history of, I think, the National Bank and what that was, what the real fight for the American Revolution was, to take the idea that wealth is a product of the human mind, and that is the basis upon which you create a nation, and it's what you can bring into existence. It's what you bring into existence as a product of the human mind and this multi-generational process of the development of ideas and the ability to communicate ideas, that is actually what wealth is, and that's what actually creates the future. And we're starting to get a sense now, as we're doing the work to recruit the support for a national bank and for NAWAPA, for building the North American Water and Power Lines, is that there's been a tremendous amount of disinformation about Hamilton and about who Jackson was in particular. This is very pervasive, that Hamilton was some sort of British agent, intervening to bring in a central bank, and the whole idea of what the American Revolution was actually about, to uplift the highest idea of mankind, has been really very obscured. People are very confused on it.
They believe it lies.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Just going back to take this conception of the powers of classical artistic composition, in the defining of what our American Revolution represented and the power of, fighting for what the human being, what the, our republic was set to represent, at the same time that you had the signing of the Declaration of Independence in Europe, you had the development of national cathedrals, classical musical opera centers going on. Now, what was the role of the empire? What was the role that to put a stop to that? You had a role to put a stop to that, to say that, well, the only people that should be given the privilege of classical music, of actually having the right to participate in that, are the wealthy, or the aristocrats, or the elite. If you were a serf, you needed to stay in your place. If you need to stay enslaved. And so that was the fight that was being waged. And the founders and the drafters of our Declaration of Independence and Constitution knew that the real fight was at the highest level of the ideas of the fight for human creativity, the fight for beauty, for real classical culture. And that goes all the way back to the development of our republic, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and even beforehand. And so, yeah, it's true. You get to the question of why people have been duped and accepted the lies of, what a so-called credit system is, from the standpoint of, well, how much money does it give me, how much pleasure does it give me, and whatever sensual perceptions that they've been given to believe in all of the crap that they believe in today, because they don't really understand the principled fight that was waged around this higher question of the nature of human beings.
Now, there's a massive brainwashing just on this Hamilton question. And I would just like to say, for the record, that Aaron Burr was a total traitor, British agent. He shot Hamilton in my state of New Jersey, and he was trying all the while to bust up the United States. He was working for these wealthy lawyers who had land in New York. He wanted to split their land off from the United States. Later, you had Andrew Jackson, the thief, crook who destroyed the National Bank, who was in exactly the same treasonous tradition. And I found out some of these populist networks are actually, I forget what the name of it is. There's a little video on YouTube called, I think it might be called The American Dream or something, and it's supposed to be a cartoon about how some poor guy gets ripped off on his mortgage. And it all comes back down to the fight between Hamilton and the people who opposed him. And when Burr kills Hamilton, the cartoon character says, "Good shot." I mean, it's that explicit. And so you have people like the Ron Paul supporters, the Kucinich supporters, as Michael Kirsch has been pointing out in his videos, who they know that something's wrong. They know that the Federal Reserve is unconstitutional, and they don't have a clue about what is the nature of the United States and the goodness of the United States. So we had a government that actually was based on the principle of agape. Our government was based on a genuine love of the divine spark of mankind and human creativity, and that the people who devised this credit system were actually able to take a concept which you would say is not, formal. It's not formalizable in a certain sense, but they were actually able to devise a system which allowed the development of the most noble aspects of the human identity. And this is what we really have to get across to the population, because there are many well-intended people who are behaving like complete idiots on these questions.
Yeah, it's true. Just on that idea that our country was founded on a beautiful principle, that was the beginning of the credit system in Massachusetts, where we didn't have enough actual currency in the country, so the government of the Massachusetts Bay Colony said, well, we're going to coin our own currency, we're going to issue our own currency, so that instead of our people being foreclosed upon and being left without jobs and left to the whim of the merchants in London, we're going to stimulate our economy here and allow for people to be human, to develop, to have lives, and to engage in a betterment process. So we issued our own currency right here in 1652, I believe, the Pine Tree Shilling, and that was the beginning of the credit system, then which you saw later with Hamilton. So this was the beginning of our nation. We said we're going to look out for the people, not for these private financial interests.
You have to recognize that this crazy character, actually what he did as becoming president, he had already ripped off an Indian tribe, a highly civilized Indian tribe, with an existing treaty with the United States, the Cherokees. And the purpose of that was to set up the slave system in the South, because they wanted to move the slavery system into an area where it was warmer, and in order to have the slaves be cheaper. Because if you had to keep them warm, then you couldn't use them. That would make them more expensive. So that was the system. And he did that. That was what he did. And then the whole thing was a swindle. The shutting down of the national bank system was another swindle of the same kind, which goes on to this day. People still believe in that nonsense. And without what Jackson did, under the direction of bankers like Burr and the successor, that without that, we couldn't have had the Civil War. It was Burr and Company who organized the Civil War, and it was Jackson who made it possible as president. He set the process in motion. Well, remember, 37. Jackson is now just out of the presidency. Crash. The whole system crashes. And the United States never fully recovered until actually Lincoln never recovered from the effect of the treasonous actions of that character. But people today are so ignorant that they actually, even leading members of the Democratic parties, would celebrate Jackson, an actual traitor to the United States, a skunk of the worst degree, and they still treat the Jackson tradition. That shows you what the problem today is. Our people are still stupid. They still get into this kind of stupidity of believing in pure myths, which, if investigated, are lies. And that's what you've got. You've got a lie in terms of the Democratic Party. You've got, as a president, that's a lie. You've got the lies in the Republican Party. You get more lies there. You get more for your money.
Well, like Scott Garrett, for example, who Diane's running against with his whole thing on the getting rid of the preamble, what it just shows a complete lack of understanding of principle, that they want to reduce the Constitution down to the idea of the general welfare, posterity, and sovereignty are just irrelevant fluff that happened to be inserted. And frankly, I go back to like the whole Tea Party, that this was at first it was just an organic outpouring of part of the mass strike process where they saw Obama, who wanted to kill them with the health care bill. They saw the bailout that was killing them that way, and they had this spontaneous outpouring, and then Republican Party networks move in and try to grab it and turn it into this anti-tax thing, as if, I mean, we've cited this before, but on the Declaration of Independence, the issue of no taxation without representation was number 17. Ahead of it were a whole list of this quality of the human soul that was primary, that we weren't going to live under the rule of the British Empire and it's be subject. And
well, ironically enough, for the right-wingers and the Tea Parties, one of the big concerns in the Declaration of Independence was the British weren't allowing immigration.
There you go. Yeah, but it's just a question of principle. So that's by fighting this on the level of what we're laying out with Glass-Steagall, the credit system, NAWAPA, and with all of the extended aspects of what NAWAPA is, that brings that back in. But it's all based on this principle of the true immortal mission of preparing for the coming generations. And that's what your banking system should be about. It's not some control mechanism, but it's to facilitate growth of the future of society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the question is, it's how do you unify sovereign nation states around a common aim for mankind? And everything that we're discussing here, is the way that has to be approached, from this very fight over the nature of the creative powers and the contributions to the commitment to progress in civilization and society. And what you're seeing right now with the collapse of the system, what was just introduced or announced by the IMF, this continued bailout policy, fraudulent bailout policy that is going to destroy nation states, on top of the fact that you have a Hitler in the White House that's pushing a policy on behalf of his British puppet masters for thermonuclear war, World War III. And the only way that you're going to empower people to fight against that, to overcome their fears, is by taking up this very mantle of what we've proposed here and what we're discussing from the standpoint of why is it that the powers of human creativity, of real classical culture, classical beauty, has been stripped from the population, and how are we going to fight to restore that again? You even go, I was discussing this before, you go to operas today, and the composers of, or should I say, the directors of operas today, taking the works of Verdi and taking the works of Mozart and others, are just destroying it because they want to be popular. They want to say, well, I have to do something that's going to look good to the population. A lot of people don't like that old opera stuff, and it's not sexy anymore. So we have to do something to make it sellable to the population. Well, you don't need to make Mozart sellable, because after so many hundreds of years, Mozart is still adored, still loved. Unlike the top 10 charts, people, they have these songs up, rap songs, whatever songs, up every day, and they're up for a day, and then people are like, what was that? I forgot about that already. How is it that someone like the mind of a Mozart can stick around for generations and generations and generations and still have the most powerful effect that it did when Mozart was first composing? So that's what people have to get over and really fight to understand, is that classical music is not just something that's like, well, if you're into that kind of stuff, it's all right, it's cool, but if you're not, oh well. But it's something, a higher quality and principle that transforms the mind to be able to fight in a way that you never thought you could fight.
Let's consider a point which we haven't taken up here so far in the discussion so we don't lose it. We're faced right now, and the full impact of this has to be understood by people out there, because they're not getting it. They're not getting the point. That we're on the verge, and the President of the United States has announced his intention to move in that direction. He has proposed that the United States government back up a war against Iran by encouraging Iran and Israel to go into Iran to try to destroy the place. And they're going to take the Israelis, get them to fight the war, which will be actually an extermination of the Israelis. You want to eliminate Israel entirely, start that war. Because what Obama has done to ensure that the citizens of Israel are exterminated this time is he's going to have the United States forces continue that war. Now, if the United States were, under Obama, to continue that war as the president has committed himself to do, the Israelis will become extinct, because that will trigger a thermonuclear war from which nothing in that region of the world will survive. And similarly, we have a similar case now. This president has moved to shut down space, anything in space. Well, it happens that we're now coming into a change in the galaxy, where the position of the solar system of the galaxy is shifting, which means that the intensity of actions, which during the existence of man over 2 many years of life, will go into jeopardy. Human extinction. We could deal with that, but the problem that we have to deal with is the increasing danger of a big rock hitting the Earth as it did before in past times, which would cause the immediate extermination of the human species. And Obama represents a view, and the people in the Congress who consent to this have represented that view, of saying we're going to have the extinction of the human species. We're going to celebrate that. So that everything that means anything to human life, you have the example of the effect of a thermonuclear war, which is what Obama will start. If the Israelis are told to go into Iran and make as much of a fuss as they can there, and if the United States, according to our president, is going to continue that war by his assertion to complete it, would mean at that point the alliances in the planet today would go into a thermonuclear war from which the probability even, not the certainty necessarily, but the probability of the extermination of the human species would be the event which celebrated this president's presidency. And yet we still tolerate that. We still are indifferent to the welfare of humanity as such. We are willing to risk the extermination of humanity, and you will find that anybody in the military realms who's experienced knows that. Jack Kennedy knew that and warned about that in his speech. We've reached a condition, as he was advised by MacArthur and Eisenhower and others on this situation. If we go into this kind of war, the extermination of the human species is possible. We can't do it. And so they killed him, and then they started wars which were totally unnecessary and unwarranted. And now again, we've come to the same thing. We have presidents who are worthless bums who know this or advised on this, and yet allow this to become. There's no reason for any war today between the two continents, or the area, the Pacific area and the Atlantic area. There's no reason for it. There's no purpose to it. If the war is going to be fought, it's going to be an extermination war. If you start an extermination war between forces based on the Atlantic and forces based in the Pacific, what are you going to get? You're going to get the American submarines coming up with their thermonuclear equipment. They're going to launch one round, what the submarines can launch at that point. And that is quite a blow. And the minute those submarine balls are elevating to strike Russia and China and probably India too, then Russia and China will respond with their balls, so that they don't, if they are exterminated, they'll say, you're going to take you too. And this president who's unfit for office is now the tool chosen by his British masters to launch such a threat of war, because the British don't intend to get clobbered in return. They intend to scare the pants out of the Russians and the Chinese and others in the hope that they cause them to surrender. And then the British can kill these guys off at their leisure with their own weapons. This is the evil we face. And this is the real evil. But we allow it. We could eliminate that evil because, you know, the leadership of the U.S. military forces know this. And unless a president overrode them, that war would never start. Minor wars might start, but not that kind of war. But what we're facing, and the very fact, every gutless wonder that tolerates Obama, and every gutless wonder that tolerates the kind of presidential candidates running from the Republican Party, every one of them would lead the United States to the same type of destruction, and the world at large as well. And how can we consider politicians, members of Congress, running for high office when these are the facts of the matter, the first facts of the matter of any patriot to consider? And patriots do consider this. Our leading generals consider this. People in Europe consider this. People in Russia consider it. But on the basis of a British desire to bluff Russia, China, and others into submission, they are pushing for what will happen. Because if Russia and China know that such a force is being deployed at them, they are not going to accept extinction. Because if a peaceful submission occurred, there would be effectively an extinction of Russia, an extinction of China, an extinction. Because the British have said, the British Queen has said, the intention now is the rapid reduction of the human population from 7 billion people on this planet now to less than 1. And we allow a puppet of the British Queen, who has prescribed this policy for the United States as well as for Britain itself, to reduce the human population to 1 billion people from 7. And they're going to support a puppet of the British, which is what this president is. The British created him. They got the fake money to make him president. They got the fake votes to make him president. And we allow this piece of crap called a president to be a tool of the British monarchy in doing this to the planet Earth and to its population? And a president who, under British influence, acts and says, we're not going to do anything in space to protect Earth from destruction of the human population by large rocks, which are now coming more plentifully under the conditions of the change in the galactic position of the solar system. And leading scientists are warning us of this. And this bum, under British influence, is doing that as part of the reduction of the human population from 7 billion people now to less than 1, which is the official declaration of the Queen and her retinue. Now, where's our American patriotism now? Who are the American patriots who are running for office? If they're patriots, why aren't they acting to prevent this and similar kinds of things? We've reached the point, how many voters are qualified morally to vote? Or morally qualified to deny their obligation to vote? If you don't vote, and that brings in this kind of president, you're just as guilty as if you did vote for him. because you're helping to create it. Your vote is supposed to help protect the nation. Your individual vote is supposed to help protect the nation as well as promote it. And every man in life who's got the license to vote has also the corresponding obligation to stand up as citizens and say, no, you're not going to do that to us. We're not the kind of cowards that will let you do that to us. We're going to throw this guy out of office now. He's impeachable, highly impeachable. He's violated the Constitution on every count necessary to throw him out of office as mentally incapable as well as impeachable. And the man that doesn't have the guts to vote for his impeachment is not fit to serve.
Well, it's clear that the Russians are very aware of the threat, and they've made that clear by going with your policies in a very big way in the last weekend or so, where Terra America published this 3,000-word article on your work on the Strategic Defense Initiative, and Putin will soon, I think in the first week of May, be inaugurated as the new president of Russia. So clearly they are aware of the threat, and it's also clear they don't intend to back down to the British and allow themselves to be destroyed, because the model, what Britain would like Russia and China to do, is what Europe did. Give up their sovereignty, shut down their technology, go green, get rid of nuclear power, and die. And Russia and China have no intention of doing that, and the Russians have made that very clear by going with what you're saying in a very big and public way.
Exactly.
Well, they did that in the 90s under the liberalization model. You know, after the fall of the Soviet system, they went with what the British plan was, and look at the rate of drug addiction, prostitution, alcoholism. I mean, they were dying as a nation. So I think Russia and China know if they submit to the British, if they back down on this threat, it means their extinction anyway.
Yeah. And as human beings, they're not going to accept it.
Right.
It's better to die than to leave filth like that or loose in the solar system.
Well, I think that comes back again to that question of restoring morality and what NAWAPA can do to do that. Because one of the things that comes up in the organizing for is, Americans are too lazy, look at the young kids, they don't know how to do anything, video games, and which is in one sense true, but you give people a mission, and every time we've had a mission as a nation, the space program under Kennedy, what Roosevelt did with the New Deal, then with it is the corresponding commitment to the future and therefore a development of true morality again. So I think that's how we'll restore this quality back to the American spirit.
Well, I would just say, I think in closing, unless people have more to add, that it really makes clear that the job is on us. It depends. The American people have to step forward, have to stop being asleep, have to stop thinking like slaves, and join with us and what we represent, and get the United States to represent what was intended by the Founding Fathers, which is emphatically not what was intended by Andrew Jackson and some of the other traitors that we've referenced.
Now we've just made clear what's important and exceptional about this team of candidates.
Very good. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.